Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here at Los Angeles Pacific University. My name is Craig Brewer, and I will be hosting this panel presentation today. I'm so excited to be with you. The topic that we have today is promoting mental wellness in the online environment. This is part of our ongoing series we're doing at LAPU on human-centered learning and design. And a few things I want to just clarify before we get started. We really want this to be an interactive presentation, so please utilize the chat function and the Q&A function for any questions that you have throughout the presentation. I also want to mention that this is in fact being recorded, so we are recording this meeting as well. As you pose questions, the panel may answer right then and there. Or one of the other things that we're doing is we may save your question if we see themes emerging for the panel presentation. So essentially, I've got my colleagues with me here today. Chelsea McHenry is our Associate Director of Student Success. We also have Freddie Tung, who is a full-time faculty member for our graduate programs, and Shannon Hunt, who is a full-time faculty member for our undergraduate psychology programs at LAPU. So the way that this is going to work this morning is that each of them is going to provide a little bit, a presentation show. You get to hear from each of them. And then after that, we're going to have a panel presentation. We're going to open it up for discussion. So Freddie Tung is going to start with just giving us a little bit of the history and the context around mental wellness. Then Shannon Hunt's going to talk a little bit about belonging and what that looks like and how to create belonging. And then finally, we'll hear from Chelsea as well, just to talk about some of the things that we've been doing more specifically at LAPU to create belonging for students. At the end of that, we'll have an opportunity for the panel presentation. And again, I want this to be as dynamic as possible. So please engage and ask questions along the way. So without further ado, let me get started. Let me introduce Freddie Tung, our faculty member in the graduate programs. And Freddie is going to provide us with a little bit of context and an overview for some of the trends that we've been seeing in higher education.
Thanks, Craig. So glad to be with everyone this morning. Just a little bit on the mental health trends that we've been seeing in higher ed, really over the last decade, but it's really been exacerbated, I would say, in the last 4 years since COVID. Just an increase in some of the most common mental health issues, depression, stress, anxiety. But again, this has been happening for a while, definitely the last 10, 15 years, but really kind of skyrocketed since 2020. Again, obviously pandemic related, we see how stress, anxiety, feelings of depression were increased academically through financial concerns. We see lockdown, social distancing, all of that has been, again, in just really multiplying the stressors that people are, especially college students, are experiencing. Also, due to the lockdowns and kind of isolation, social media use obviously increased significantly, which my suspicion is definitely adds to kind of all of the things that we are kind of talking about and seeing today. Next slide, Craig. So again, in terms of how these areas specifically impacted mental health in college students, academic challenges were significant. So many students were not in an online format and had to quickly overnight figure out how to do online schooling, which again, the stress of figuring out how to navigate a new platform, how to deal with technological issues, even if we're kind of talking about some students in lower income populations may not have had computer access or just didn't have a laptop. Also, the academic challenges were exacerbated in some ways in some higher ed institutions by professors who had never taught online. So professors who were not adept at figuring out how to put a class online, how to then communicate with students, how to offer the same level of teaching and support that they were used to. Again, all of these factors kind of added up to significant academic stressors placed on students. Again, the social isolation was a really big one because students go from, on let's say like a traditional campus, living in a dorm with all of your friends close by to being completely isolated. A lot of students had to move home. And again, and really the outlet was social media. So again, this really only exacerbates all of the presentations that we were kind of talking about: depression, stress, anxiety, as well as other more significant issues as well. And the financial strain. So in some colleges, if you were forced to move out and go home, so all the students, campuses were closed. However, some students had to continue to pay their housing bill. And so again, a lot of schools continue to charge those fees to students, causing significant financial strains. Also, potential job loss, and a lot of other funding issues. Just again adds to the overall mental health wellness that we were discussing. Access to mental health resources, again, very pandemic related, where we saw again, virtual counseling was starting to gain some traction and popularity, but then it just really took off during the pandemic. The problem with it at the time was a lot of people weren't aware that it existed. A lot of people didn't know really how to access it. And some people who did have access to it may not have had private spaces necessarily to do counseling once a week. We saw at Governor State University, where I was director of counseling during the pandemic, we had students sit in their cars in the parking lot because we were virtual only, and that was the only private space that they had. So again, we saw access to mental health significantly impacted during this time, even though virtual counseling really opened up your possibilities in terms of, not being able to see someone that was well outside your vicinity. A lot of students just simply didn't know that this was an option at the time. And again, pre-existing mental health conditions, students just, again, with the access to mental health and also the isolation piece and all the added stressors, a lot of the mental health conditions that may have been more managed or more under control may have seen significant spikes or significant declines in functioning. Again, all of the added stressors combined just really showed how mental health and wellness has significantly, I would say, declined over the last few years. But I think we're starting to see a trend. Things are starting to pick back up. We're kind of in a new landscape educationally, and a lot of students are sort of adapting to that changing landscape. So Chelsea is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about belonging.
So thank you so much, Freddie. I really appreciate all of the context that you provided. I think that context is really critical as we begin to really try to grapple with some of the current issues that we're seeing. So I want to introduce Shannon Hunt, just to talk a little bit about creating belonging and to share a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing from the research, Shannon, and also to hear a little bit about your personal experiences as well.
Thank you so much, both Freddie and Craig. I think Freddie did a good job of painting a picture of what we're seeing in a lot of our students, right? And what we're seeing in our classrooms. When we are in an online university, we have a little bit more of some unique challenges that we didn't have or we don't have whenever we are in a university where we're in person with students. We can high five them when they come into class. We can greet them in different places. There's organic opportunities for students to feel like they belong in campuses where there are sporting events and clubs and study rooms where they can meet in person. So what we're finding in the online learning communities, we have some unique challenges to help our students in terms of mental health. And we're going to talk about that in context of belonging. So if we look at the abundance of research about belonging, we understand that belonging plays a critical role in a person's mental, behavioral, physical health. So let's start by just defining belonging for a moment here. So belonging is defined as a subjective feeling that one is an integral part of their surrounding systems, including family, friends, school, community, work environments, communities, cultural groups, and physical places. Okay, so we know that our universities obviously fit in this context here. And we really want our students to know that they are absolutely a valued part of our university. So in this abundance of research from belonging, one of the pieces of information that comes out with quite significant clarity is the fact that belonging is absolutely a fundamental human need. In fact, it's likened to whenever we think about basic needs, we think about food, water, shelter, and belonging actually is associated with one of these basic needs that we have. Because if we are not in a place where we feel like we belong, if we do not feel like we are valued in some type of system, it impacts things like obviously our health and our survival rates as well. Just to give you a little picture of this, there was a meta-analysis of 70 studies, and they identified that social isolation, the risk of associated with social isolation, was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day and twice as dangerous as obesity. So social isolation, the risks are as significant as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and twice as dangerous as obesity. That's something that should be very telling to us as a university, because we have opportunities to create and cultivate pathways for students to belong. And it has significant impact on their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. So this is something where we need to step in the gap, even as an online university, and probably especially as online learning arenas, to make sure we bridge the gap and cultivate opportunities for belonging. So Craig, if you don't mind changing that slide there, that would be great. Let's look a little bit at the specific impacts of belonging. We're going to look at two different sides of this. When someone has a strong sense of belonging and when someone lacks a sense of belonging. Okay, so obviously, whenever someone has a strong sense of belonging, remembering that this is similar to having our basic needs met. It is a fundamental need to feel like we belong. We're created that way, right? So people have a healthier sense of mental health. They have a better mental health, better physical health, increased resiliency, increased coping, more positive social relationships, academic achievement, occupational success. But look at these last two as well. Increased life satisfaction, quality of life increases, increased overall well-being. Now we look at the counter side of this. And we heard what Freddie said in the beginning about what we're seeing in the mental health of our students, right? When someone lacks a sense of belonging, these are the potential outcomes, which can be very devastating. And we know that we're seeing students who fall within these categories, okay? So we see an increased risk of depression, increased risk of anxiety, suicidal ideation, antisocial behavior, rapid decline in cognitive functioning, okay? We see the health impacts of poor quality sleep, cardiovascular difficulties, immune systems that lower, and then also we're looking at just increased risk of early mortality. Thinking back to that statistic about social isolation and these pieces here about lack of sense of belonging and these outcomes, we can see how critical it is that we make sure that we provide opportunities for students to belong, because it does impact them in their mental well-being, but their physical well-being and all parts of our being, because they're symbiotic, right? So we need health in all of these areas. And in our online learning environments, we have unique, again, opportunities to do this. And as online educators, we know that we are innovative. We have to take risks. We have to look outside the box. And this is an area where we want to step into and close the gap, where students are able to have opportunities for sense of belonging. And we want to do that in creative ways. Okay. Go ahead, Craig. That's great. In 2007, social psychologists Cohen and Walton from Stanford University coined a really important phrase I want us to become familiar with, because it really does align with our students, at least at some time in their academic journey, okay? It's called belonging uncertainty, and it's defined as the uncertainty that students may experience when moving into a new social and academic situation and environment. That is all of our students at one time in their academic journey, right? They're all going to feel new at some point in time in their beginning, or even sometimes at the end, they feel like this is something that's new to them. They're walking into a new online class, they're in a new program, whatever it might look like. Our students are feeling this belonging uncertainty, and there's something I really want to highlight. Students will more easily perceive that they don't belong than they do belong. Okay, let's look at this here. So students often perceive negative events, I want you to hear this, as evidence they do not belong, and results in poor academic outcomes and in disengagement. Let's pause and think about this for a second. If students perceive some type of experience at our university or in our online classrooms as negative, it's going to default, as for a lot of students, as evidence that they don't belong. So this can be a lot of things. And I'd love for you to put in the chat if you can think of things. I'm going to give you some ideas here. But imagine that a student is new to a classroom, and we have discussions, as most online classes do, and they put their initial post in the week. They're the first one. They're eager to do this. 24 hours later, other posts are responded to, and theirs is not. Well, they might perceive that as a negative situation, and they might think of that as evidence that they don't belong here. Or let's say that maybe they email their professor in the middle of the week, 48 hours later, they have not heard back from their professor yet. They may perceive that as negative and evidence that they don't belong. And it could be anything along their journey. Maybe they don't feel like they really fit into their program, or maybe they submitted their application and it's been a week and they haven't heard anything and they think they should already know. And they perceive that as negative and as evidence that they don't belong. So we need to be aware of this belonging uncertainty piece, because their perception will dictate what they believe in terms of belongingness, right? Again, it's easier for students to believe they don't belong than they do belong. And we even just look at how we tend to focus on thoughts. There could be 30 great or neutral things that happen in our day, and one thing that happened that wasn't so great, or we perceive as negative. And where does our mind shift to? We focus on that narrowed one event instead of think of the 30 other things that were great or neutral. So the same thing for our students. If they have a single negative event, that to them may be evidence that they don't belong. Okay, is there a question for me there in the group? Craig, let me know if there's a question for me or something that people wanted to add.
I think there was just some feedback here about how the point underscores the importance of framing negative academic outcomes. For example, failing a course, academic probation, et cetera, with the growth mindset. So applying that growth mindset.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for whoever provided that comment. It makes such an important, those are influencing factors that we need to be aware of in our online education systems. Dr. Gopalan, who is a professor at Penn State University, did 3 studies. By the way, this is all about higher ed here, this information, but she did 3 studies, and there's a couple outcomes that I really want to highlight for you guys. And it was about belonging as well. she identified that underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students and first-generation low-income students reported a lower sense of belonging in their four-year experience at their college than their non-underrepresented racial and ethnic minority student counterparts and their non-first generational low-income student counterparts. Okay, so that's something we need to keep in mind. I know at our university, we have a number of students who fall in these categories, and we want to make sure, again, we are seeing them, we are hearing them, we're letting them know that they're such an important part of our university, right? The second study, I just want to actually quote what she and her colleagues said here. Again, really hear what they identified. Students, particularly those with little knowledge of how college works, Chelsea can speak to this. She's a senior success coach and advisor. I might have butchered your title a little bit there, so please clarify for me. But we have a lot of students who begin with little knowledge, right? And those who experience discrimination, we have these students as well, or are aware of negative stereotypes about their social group, hear this, may make global interpretations of why college can be challenging and may even associate challenges as evidence that they and students like them don't belong. Again, the studies are similar because one was done in 2011, this is done in 2020, and they're still using the same similar language as evidence. So their perceptions, whether they're accurate or not, it's important to them, it's true to them, they believe that they don't belong. Craig, would you mind going to the next slide there? All right, perfect. Oh, not quite there yet. Perfect, right here. So based on Dr. Gopalan's research, there are some pivotal takeaways that we can walk away with and what we can do to help cultivate opportunities for belonging for our students in this online learning arena, okay? So we're gonna walk through some of these, but again, in the chat, if you have other ideas that pop up, please don't hesitate to let me know. But I do wanna say this, we want our students to know that they are absolutely critical part of our university, right? We want them to know that we want them and we need them in our programs. We want them to be change makers in their profession in the future. We want them to know they are valued, their voice is valued in our classrooms, that they absolutely belong. And we need to make sure as instructors or in enrollment or in success coaching or whatever your university looks like in your systems, that we are absolutely vocalizing to students how much we want them there. We should be their biggest supporters and let them know that they belong. But let's look here at some of this research. Some of the things we can do. We can communicate to students at the onset. Remember, we're thinking about these new students coming in. They're unfamiliar with what their course room is like. Maybe they don't know what Moodle is or Sakai or whatever their framework is. And maybe they don't know how to connect to their peers and colleagues, and they're scared to talk to their professor. They're going to come across challenges. We want to communicate to students that these challenges are going to happen, to expect them, and it's okay. And then also point to normalize this for students. Every student is going to go through challenges as they adapt to their new learning environment, okay? This is not something unique to them. It will impact them in unique ways and they will have unique challenges, but it's not unique to the student. So they're set apart, that they're the only ones experiencing challenges and difficulties. So we want to normalize that for students as they begin their educational journey and along the way. We want to prepare them by telling them, hey, challenges will happen, it's okay, and normalize this. But we also want to help them understand that belonging is a process. It does not happen overnight. We're going to try to create opportunities for them to belong, but we also need to let them know, you know, if they don't have a lot of engagement and discussion, or they show up to the moms group and there's only one other person there or something like that in the beginning, they're like, well, that's it. I perceive that as negative. That's evidence that I don't belong. We want them to understand that it's a process. It takes time. It takes action as well, okay, on their part. We can create opportunities, but they have to step into that, and we can encourage them to do so And one of the ways I think is very encouraging for students to do this is to find examples of other colleagues, other students who've successfully done this before. I know that on our university website and probably your university websites too, we have success stories for students. So maybe we come alongside a student who's struggling. They feel like they don't belong. They're getting ready to quit because there's so much going on, and I already struggle with so many other things in life. I work full time, I've got kids, and I don't even feel like I belong here or I can even do this. Well, maybe we know a student who has a similar story to maybe how they feel or their experiences and what kind of cultural groups they belong to, whatever it looks like. And maybe we can connect this student who's struggling with a student who's already ahead of the game and is 2 years into their education. Or maybe we have video testimonies from students and say, you know, their story is a little similar to yours. You have very unique paths that you've taken, but you might want to hear from this student too, who's doing really great, because I know that you can be that next person we can video, and you're going to have that great story for someone. Okay. It's just, it takes time to get there. So we want to provide this for students so they see examples of students like them who are thriving and succeeding too. Okay. We also want to make sure we demonstrate that they belong. And again, that has to do with what we tell them by hearing them. It's so important to that we allow students to share their experiences without trying to combat what they're experiencing and defend anything. We want to be able to hear from them. What are you experiencing? What are you finding challenges with? And receive their feedback and hear from them. So creating space and opportunity for students to share their experiences is really important as well. And again, trying to connect our students throughout their time at the university, especially again in an online university, we have to be creative sometimes. I mentioned earlier, we have a mother's group. We also have a group for veterans. I know in my classrooms, I have meet and greets for students that are optional, that are virtual the first week of class. So I can talk with them about, hey, this is what we're doing in class. These are assignments. Would you like to, and they get to introduce themselves and build connections. We have some like our capstone classes where they go through 3 classes together. So they build that network in that community. We have to be creative sometimes, but there are so many opportunities that I'm sure you guys are doing at your university. And Chelsea's going to talk a little bit more about how we can cultivate these opportunities.
So I've got one comment here, Shannon, I wanted just to
Please do.
share with. So this is from Janice, and she shared the University of Texas at El Paso has a high ratio of first generation and English second language students. The university makes a point of supporting them, and they celebrate some of the instructors who were first gen as well. And
Yes.
so our reply, thank you so much for that post, Janice. At LAPU, I want you all to know we also primarily enroll many first generation students, almost 50%. And about 72% of LAPU students are also underrepresented racial ethnic minorities.
Right. I really appreciate, Janice, that comment. One of my favorite parts of commencement is when we have all of the first generation students stand up. Our chancellor has everyone stand up, and it's just an eruption of cheer. And it just, it is so empowering and exciting to see that. I love that. And Janice, also, I have some family that used to live in El Paso. I've been there a lot. I really love El Paso. That's great. Can we just move to the next slide? I don't have a lot of time here. I don't want to take any time away from Chelsea, but I do want you guys to be aware of this model here. This was published in the Australian Journal of Psychology. It's an integrative framework for belonging, and all of these pieces interact with each other to help students find and create a sense of belonging. I just want to go over what these are, and we can talk maybe later whenever we're doing some discussion about ways we can to add to these. The first, though, is competencies of belonging. This actually has to do with the student, whether or not they have the skills and abilities to belong. Okay, so we think about if students adapt well to social norms, if they're able to manage their emotions and their behaviors well, if they understand social cues. So this really has to do with their own competencies for belonging, but keep in mind, this is not all or nothing. they might struggle with some social cues at some point in time. And again, thinking about our populations of students, maybe we have students where in their culture, something is very normal and another student's culture, very different, right? But these skills can be developed and we can create opportunities to do this for students as well. Perception of belonging, we've already talked about belonging uncertainty. But again, it's so much easier for students to believe they don't belong than to belong. Sometimes we need to reframe things for students and help them recognize, okay, I know you said you didn't feel like anyone took anything from what you said in discussion, but I saw what Freddie said over here, and it sounded like he really aligned with what you're saying. And I saw some leadership in what you did because other students were also commenting on what you said. So while you didn't think that they really had strong engagement with you, I really saw some great things from that. So we can reframe for students. Opportunities for belonging. Here's where we get to shine, guys, as faculty, as administrators, and any role you have at your university. We need to create unique opportunities for our students to belong. This impacts, again, their behavioral health, their mental health, their social health, their spiritual health, their physical health, and motivation to belong. This is very individualized. Sometimes we have students who have some learned helplessness. Sometimes they have experiences from the past that tell them that there's no point, I'm not going to belong anymore. Motivational interviewing is a great approach to use with students. We don't have time to dive into that, but if you have questions, let me know. I can help you with that. But thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea. She has some amazing things to share with you about what can be done as well.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a second while I give a little bit of transitional context from pulling in some of what Freddie said and what Shannon said to talk a little bit about how we at LAPU are trying to implement the things that we've seen in the research and continue to learn. One of the big things that I think for us during the COVID era that came about was, unlike some of the instructors that Freddie mentioned that were trying to convert their course from a physical classroom to the online environment, we had the blessing and privilege of already being in that space. And what I think that allowed for us as faculty and staff to really pay attention to was the mental health of our students and what they were reporting in higher volumes to us as faculty and staff. And I think LAPU took some opportunities to both transition some of our resources that we offer to our students, but also to begin making sure that we're capturing the experience that our students are having around this issue of mental health, seeing progress and trying to document the progress that our students are explaining to us that they're having. So I actually pulled a few different pieces with the help of our Chief Academic Officer, who helped me provide some of this information. Dr. Herman, but we pulled together some of the different ways that we try to identify for our students their experience here at LAPU and how it ties to their mental well-being. We even began both sending a student satisfaction survey over the last year. We regularly send an end of course survey where we have specific questions that are targeted around what we think speak to belonging, feeling engaged, feeling encouraged and supported in the classroom that they're in. And we also send an annual mental wellness survey that speaks directly just to a student's mental wellness here at LAPU. And so one of the questions that we pulled out of the student satisfaction survey is that someone at LAPU cared about me as a person. 92% of our students that responded said this was it was a 92% importance rating, and 88% stated that they were satisfied with their level of care that they receive here at LAPU. The scores for both I felt encouraged throughout their course, I felt engaged throughout the course, I feel supported, and my instructor demonstrated respect for students, which I think showing up with respect, we all know that when we feel respected, we feel we can be our most of ourselves in that space, right? And so being able to have students acknowledge that their instructors allow them to show up because they respect who they are and who they are coming to the classroom as. All out of 5 on those scores there. So you can see 4.8 or 4.48, 4.49, 4.46, and 4.64. And again, it's the importance and satisfaction around those 2 different questions that they're being asked the same. On our mental wellness survey, the first question actually is speaking about how many of our students state that their academic journey or goals over the past year have been impacted by mental wellness challenges. So this speaks a lot to what Freddie was speaking about at the beginning, and what the ratings are that our students are seeing. This is actually a number that has decreased for us over the last couple of years. And some of it we believe is tied to some of the resources that we have put into place. And as Dr. Tung said, that we're leveling out maybe in this new landscape a little bit as we start to see some differences there. And so 7.8% of our respondents said that they were significantly impacted by mental wellness challenges over this past year, which is a decrease, but still over a third of our student population has had an adjustment in life that they're dealing with. And you can see some of the different things that they are reporting that they're experiencing, which aligns with the research that was talked about already: stress, anxiety, depression, family problems, and relationships. And these were just some of the main categories that students identified that we had pulled out. We also have implemented a therapy service over the last few years. So in addition to the faculty and the staff that support our students on a day-to-day basis, some of whom, like my colleagues here, are licensed professional counselors, many of us are not. And so we allowed for this service to be put in place. And we do use a virtual service that allows our students to access a licensed counselor in their state, which is important for us in the online environment. We are able to serve students outside of the realm of our normal 9 to 5 hours and outside of the state of California, where our school is located. But our students are everywhere. And so through that, we also get regular rating scores from students who have attended therapy sessions with this provider and how they're rating the service themselves. And we're getting about a 4.8 out of 5 rating on each of these. And this is consistent month over month. We get this new score updated, and that is a consistent score that we're receiving, which is very positive to us. So that's just a little bit of the context. And I want to say, we don't think we do this all perfectly, but we do have things that we are trying to implement. So that's what we want to talk with you about, is how do we feel like we're learning from these things? So go ahead and take us to that next slide there, Craig, please. I'm talking a little bit about some of the individual elements that I think we've implemented, but I also have included some qualitative quotes from students. Part of the collecting of our data is not just the quantitative numbers that we get, but also some qualitative experiences that our students are sharing with us. So I'm trying to connect some of the things that have been mentioned here. So the first thing I want to talk about is a student development focus for our faculty and staff, some of which has already been addressed both in some of the chats that have come in and others. But we really like to focus on a growth mindset and what is even called a developmental or intrusive advising approach with our students. And what intrusive advising doesn't sound great, but it actually is a part of the appreciative or developmental. And the reason it's intrusive is it means that you know your student individually and what they're going through. It means that you know how that student is being impacted in their day-to-day and how it's impacting their schooling or their goals that they have. And I think that that is a consistent experience for our students, both with their faculty, professors, and with their staff members, particularly their success coaches. They know, hey, you've got 3 kids at home, they're on break right now. How is school going? How are we adjusting? Maybe there's a death in the family. They're aware of the different things that are impacting their students. And so I think that that's just a really important key piece of that. The next one I want to talk about is opportunities for connection. I think that this speaks to half of what Shannon has said, which was she's talked about providing the opportunities, and then also our students have to show up, right? So as LAPU, we are working hard to continue to provide opportunities for connection in the online environment. And some of the ways that that looks like is phone calls. We all know we hate answering the phone sometimes, so do our students, but we do know that in the online environment, hearing someone's voice at least creates an opportunity for connection. So our success coaches, our student account specialists, and even our faculty in the very first week of class all attempt to connect with our students directly to try to break down those barriers of like the sage on the stage that can kind of be created for our students who don't have much experience in higher ed and want to learn but are afraid to approach someone. And so we create lots of opportunities for connection through phone calls. We also have a mobile app. Our mobile app is really active with both those groups that Shannon mentioned, but also with the opportunities for our students to connect in large group settings where they're able to communicate peer-to-peer in a non-graded, flexible, and just more social environment that they're able to communicate about their schooling and the things that are impacting them. And we see a lot of really interesting dialogue that our students are leading with their peers through those discussions in ways that they're not always able to do in the online environment otherwise. There's some other things that we do, but one of those is that we assign a staff member. So the opportunity for connection isn't just about a random phone call, someone new calling you each time, but it's a specific staff member that they know is their person here at LAPU that is a real human that's on the other end of the phone that they can contact at any time. And you can read there in that quote that was a big impact to this particular student about saying that the help of their coach and the professors has led to this being a really great experience for them here at LAPU. Craig, I'm going to have you jump to the. Go ahead.
Yeah, one question for you really quickly, Chelsea. Yeah. For many, they may not be familiar with the success coach model that we have at LAPU. Can you say a little bit more about how success coaches are assigned and what that looks like?
Great point. Our success coaches are a holistic academic advisor and essentially academic coach. So they are separated into disciplines that they work with students based on specific majors, which allows them to not just be more in the weeds with the student's specific program, helping them overcome the common barriers a student may experience there, but also to partner well with our academics team and our assistant deans to understand and communicate back the stories that we're hearing from our students to the academics team so that we can make adjustments, and our digital learning team that helps create the course content can help us pivot and make adjustments for our students. And so it's a lot about goal orientation, which is on the next slide, and some other things that we help our students to kind of achieve at that rate. And every single student at LAPU receives a success coach, which is not always common. A lot of schools are starting to create a success coach model, but it is often only assigned to students who are on probation or are coming back after some time off. And at LAPU, we start with everyone is going to get a success coach, and then we're going to personalize the care. We also work really hard to keep a smaller group of a staff to student ratio on the staff side, not just our classrooms. Our classrooms have a great small staff faculty to student ratio as well, but we keep about 115 students per success coach roster. So they're able to develop deeper relationships with those students and walk with them from day one at the university all the way through to graduation is the goal. So thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Great question. Thanks. The next thing I think that our university works hard to do is a lot of what Shannon spoke about with normalizing the challenge. I think a lot of our staff has learned to use the language of when, not trying to put anything on our students that they're going to encounter challenges, but knowing that they will encounter challenges. So instead of if language, we talk about when you encounter a technology problem, what is your plan to overcome this? How are we going to help support you so that when difficulties arise, we have a maybe a stop out plan for the student to take a break from class if needed and be able to allow for our, I think, more relaxed enrollment plan where our students in our 6 sessions of the year can easily step in and out of class during that year and have up to a year before they would have to go on to a new catalog. And so it allows them the opportunity to pause when challenges become too difficult, but it also requires our staff to be intentional about talking about stepping back in. So the plan is not just, okay, you're taking a pause, but what does it mean to eliminate the shame around stopping? And how do we make sure that you approach it again? How do you come back to finish those goals that you came to? And so I think being able to say that we have some other things in place. We have an outstanding persistence award that we award to our students who are experiencing difficulties. It means a lot to them. They usually are very appreciative. And we work hard to identify students that are continuing to push through in the midst of really difficult circumstances. We also, in addition to the lax enrollment break period, we also have a flexible late work policy that our instructors are given the autonomy to work directly with their students, even in the online environment. Sometimes that can be a little more restrictive actually about policies and procedures with, automated deadlines in the system, right? And our instructors have the ability to work directly with their students to overcome obstacles as they bring them to their attention. I mentioned the goal orientation already. Learning and helping them to overcome obstacles is a huge part of that. And we start from day one, talking about what does it mean to be successful? How is maybe sometimes we say B is for balance when our students get all upset because they're not getting an A, but sometimes a B is for balance in this session. And that is success, and that's a win. And then the last piece that I'm going to mention today is the resources that we offer. So I mentioned the counseling service that we have, both with a scheduled counselor or with one that they can access it 24/7. We also offer a lot of self-service resources for our students where they're able to access nationally recognized or nationally known and accessible resources. We have a licensed social worker available to our students to get them connected with resources when they're experiencing, homelessness or food insecurity and other things that a social worker may be able to help them with. Which we know that our students experience. I've had many of my own students who've lived in their car while they are going to school and working multiple jobs, and somehow I'm always amazed they do so much hard work to be able to be successful. So we provide these additional services in addition to our staff and faculty. And I think one of the biggest things that these additional resources provide, yes, they are at cost, right? We are paying for these vendor services that we're working with and partnering with. But the thing that it does is not just provide our students someone that they can speak with regardless of what state they're in and whatever time they want, but it also provides relief to our staff and faculty. It allows our staff and faculty to help our students get connected to resources that are beyond their capabilities or their licensing, to be able to help support them and be able to know that their student has an area to go to receive some initial care and support. And I think that is just as important. It's not just important for us to care about our students' well-being, but it's important for us as faculty and staff to have excellent well-being so that we can continue to show up for the students that we're trying to help support and see towards their graduation goals. And we talked a lot about that during this initial planning of this webinar, where we just all talked about how we feel like we belong here at LAPU, which allows us to be able to continue to show up, I think. So I think that's important. I'm going to go ahead and stop there and turn it back over to you, Craig.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. At this point, I want to open it up for panel presentation questions. I want to thank you for those that already posed some questions. So I've got a question to begin with, but as you're hearing a response to this first question, please use the chat function to pose any additional questions you may have. So the first question we have was just along the lines of being an online institution and really looking and saying, we've got all these risk factors, but an online university, how do you really manage that? And so the question I'll put is, what individual strategies have you used to come alongside of students who are struggling with mental health related challenges in this online environment? So really kind of highlighting the nature that we're not face-to-face. And so I'll just throw that out there to the panel, whomever would like to answer and start.
I'll kick us off and then hand it off to whoever wants it. I think such a good question because, again, we have unique nuances in being an online educational system. And so we don't have some of those, again, opportunities to high five a student when they come in, that type of thing. But I think there's ways that we can create a connection, this term that Chelsea used with our students. I know, for example, we're a Christian university, so halfway through the each session, I'll always send a message out to all my students and say, how can I be praying? Or if there's anything I can be praying about for you, please don't hesitate to let me know. And I would probably say, probably a third of students reach back out to me and they will tell me something I can be praying about for them. And I just think that option for them to be able to share with me something and I can pray with them and I'll type out a prayer and I'll send it off to them. That's really helped build some connection and some opportunities for belonging. I said I do the meet and greets for my students. We have all written discussions, but in my classes, I offer an opportunity for live discussions at least once a session so students can connect with each other. In some of my classes, I facilitate the capstone classes, and again, students are together for 3 sessions in a row, and they get to know each other. I require meetings with my students, so then I can meet with them halfway through each session. So then I'm seeing how they're doing, preparing for their service in their field or interviews or whatever they're at. So I can encourage them, support them, be available for questions. So I try to be very intentional to integrate audio, verbal communication with students in different ways, and video communication too, so we can see face to face. And video is not required, but if student wants it, we provide that opportunity. So just trying to look for ways that we can do that, and then connect other students like, oh, this student said this, and what have you thought about this as well? And maybe you guys can have a conversation about that. So that's just a few things that I've done. I'm sure Chelsea and Freddie and Craig have some other amazing ideas, as do all you guys in the audience as well.
I'll just kind of add my 2 cents really quick to this. I mean, definitely echo everything that Shannon says. My counselor side always says, if it's important, schedule it. So for me, I will always probably twice per 8-week course is to simply schedule a simple like email to every student, just how are you doing, something along those lines. But that usually sparks like a email, like a chain of emails, just students will then kind of either pour out everything that they're experiencing, or just respond, hey, I'm doing well, this means a lot, just pray for my dad, he's just kind of going through this. But even the simple asking, hey, how are you doing, seems to take quite a weight off. But especially the difficulty in the online environment, like Shannon is saying, like there's no spontaneous moments to have conversation with students. Every communication has to be intentional. So I'll always try to schedule a couple times, and just like I said, doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I think the fact that students know that you're even thinking about them kind of blows them away, because it just doesn't happen a lot in online environments.
Yeah, I would agree. Our department is a little structured in the ways that we intentionally outreach to our students. That's part of our thing. So we have weekly scheduled appointments with first session students who are brand new. Additionally, if students are considered at risk, maybe they're demonstrating a need for care and support in regards to academic resources that's showing up in their classroom, well, they're also regularly communicated with, both hopefully by a scheduled phone call, but also just a repeat phone call, just in case the student didn't have time to pick up at that moment. And I think back to one of the biggest parts is we need to know our students, right? So we have smaller rosters, and the goal is then spend time getting to know them, developing rapport with them, and not necessarily making it all about, well, you didn't turn in your homework, so let's talk about this, right? Like it's instead making space for the student to show up and tell you what's going on in their life, and be able to be supportive without holding shame for them, and allowing them to demonstrate some of the concerns that they have, and helping them to brainstorm ways they can move through those.
Thank you so much for the response. Lois chimed in here too, just talking about the need to connect and belong. An idea was here, could we have a weekly link for students to discuss what's up this week, or something like that, kind of aligning with what you were talking about, Freddie. I think that's a great suggestion. The other thing I'll add is all of the resources. There was a question about the resources. They're all available at www.lapu.edu, and we've got all of those for you. We're coming short on time, but I want to ask one final question of the panelists here. And the final question is, would you be willing to share a specific success story in working just with a student who is struggling with a mental health related challenge, and how they succeeded through that? And again, we'll keep the anonymity of the student confidential, but just a success story. If any of you would be willing to just talk about a success story you had with a student who was struggling, and how that worked out.
I'm sure we all have important stories life stories of students that we can share here. I think back to one student who graduated actually in December, and he was in and out of the hospital for a number of sessions. We have 8-week sessions. So he was in multiple of my classes, also in the capstone classes. Again, they're 3 series class, but some classes before that too. And knowing that he had ongoing health and mental health issues for an extended period of time, and similar to what Freddie was talking about here, I would usually just do a weekly email, like, how are you doing? What can I be praying for you? How can I support you? I think grace is something that they really appreciate students do whenever they're going through. I think Chelsea had put something in the slide about a student going through depression and the instructor understanding being very helpful. I know in our department, Freddie and I can speak to this. Whenever you're teaching and psychology department, we have a lot of students who come to this field because they've struggled with something and they want to help be professional and help people in the future. So we actually have quite a few students who have various mental behavioral health challenges. But for this student, it was just a continuous like checking in. How are you doing? And what can I do to support you? Do you need extra time here for this assignment? Can we get you an incomplete so you can do this? So we have the knowledge that we have things like incompletes and late work petitions and things that can support them that they don't have time to think about too. But by the time I received some thank you emails and noted the impact just by being present and checking in and letting me know what I can do to keep pushing through and graduating. So walking with them and not leaving, right? But having a good, healthy professional boundary as well, but just being present. How can I help you? How can I support you? And the student graduated and is doing phenomenally now, but it's just showing up, I think.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We've got another question here just about the differentiation of freshman and sophomore in RN to BSN programs and looking at the culture around that. I don't know that we have anything specific for that, but we could certainly look into that. Appreciate the question as well. I think right now we are coming to the end of our time together. We just want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today and just generating this dialogue and discussion. And again, at LAPU, we want to just come alongside of you, and we're learning together as well. So we have another webinar coming up that we want to encourage you to join, part of our human-centered learning and design. As you can see, that is listed right here below. It's going to be the personalization at scale, AI-powered learning personas. That's June 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And just encourage you to come and check that out. AI is the hot topic of the year that we've been also grappling with at LAPU. And so we'd love to see you there. I want to say a special thanks to everyone for joining us today and being with us. And then also a special thanks to our panel. Thank you, Shannon, Freddie, and Chelsea, just for sharing your experiences with us. I think I've taken a lot of great learning out of this, and I'm super grateful to you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Greg, for leading us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.